The phone rang at 11:47 p.m. Daniel Carter almost ignored it. The house had been quiet all evening, the kind of quiet that had become normal since his wife passed away 3 years earlier. But something about the call felt different. He glanced at the screen, and his heart stopped, because the name on the phone was Michael Carter, his brother. The same brother whose funeral Daniel attended 15 years ago. The same brother whose grave he visited every year. Daniel stared at the phone, convinced it had to be some kind of mistake. But the phone kept ringing. Slowly, he answered. "Hello?" For a moment, there was only static. Then a voice came through the line. Low. Familiar. "Daniel, it's me." The remote slipped from Daniel's hand because the voice sounded exactly like Michael, his dead brother. Daniel's throat tightened. "That's not funny. Who is this?" The voice replied calmly. "Daniel, I know you think I'm dead." Daniel's heart began pounding. Then the voice said something no stranger could possibly know. "Remember when Rusty buried my watch behind the oak tree?" Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. That had happened when they were kids, and only 2 people knew about it. Daniel and Michael. Then the voice said something even worse. "I don't have much time." Daniel stood up slowly. "What are you talking about?" There was a pause, and then the words that made the room feel suddenly colder. "I'm outside your house." Daniel froze, and right then, the doorbell rang. Someone was standing outside, someone who, according to every record in town, had been dead for 15 years. What Daniel was about to discover that night would force him to question everything he thought he knew about his brother's death. But before we go further, tell me, where are you watching from tonight? Is it late where you are? Or are you listening to this story somewhere quiet, just like Daniel's house was before that phone rang? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy stories that leave you questioning what's real and what isn't, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next one. Because the truth behind that doorbell is something Daniel never expected to hear. Now, to understand why that call happened, we have to go back to a story that began 15 years earlier. A story about 2 brothers, a secret, and a night that was never fully explained. And it all started on a rainy evening outside a small town in Ohio. The rain had been steadily falling that night. Not the kind that pours violently and disappears just as quickly, but the slow, persistent Ohio rain that settles over a town like a quiet blanket. Daniel Carter still remembered the sound of it. It had been tapping softly against the windshield of his truck as he drove down the narrow road that cut through the woods outside Ashford, Ohio, a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business. Back then, 15 years earlier, life had felt simpler. Daniel was 32, Michael was 29, and despite their occasional arguments growing up, the Carter brothers had always been close. The kind of close that only comes from sharing a childhood in the same small house, under the same roof, with the same stubborn father and the same patient mother. Michael had always been the more restless one. Daniel liked routines. Michael chased ideas. Daniel stayed in Ashford. Michael talked constantly about leaving. But no matter how different they were, one thing had always been true. If one brother needed the other showed up. And that's exactly why Daniel had been driving through that rain that night. Because 2 hours earlier, Michael had called him. And that call had been strange. Not frightening, not urgent, just strange enough that Daniel had noticed. Daniel could still hear Michael's voice from that evening. "Hey," Michael had said casually when Daniel answered. "Hey yourself," Daniel replied. "What's going on?" There had been a pause on the line. Not long, just long enough for Daniel to notice.
"You busy tonight?" Michael asked. Daniel had been sitting at the kitchen table with his wife, Emily, when the call came in. Emily had looked up from her book as Daniel shrugged. "Not really," Daniel answered. "Why?" Another pause. Michael cleared his throat. "Can you meet me out by County Road 14? Daniel frowned. "Out by the old quarry?" "Yeah." Daniel leaned back in his chair, confused. "Mike, that place is in the middle of nowhere. What are you doing out there?" Michael chuckled softly. "Just come out here, all right? I need to talk to you." Something about the way Michael said that word, talk, made Daniel glance over at Emily. She raised an eyebrow. "Everything okay?" she asked quietly. Daniel covered the phone with his hand. "Mike wants me to meet him out by the quarry," he whispered. Emily looked puzzled. "At night?" Daniel nodded slowly. "Yeah, I thought that was strange too." On the phone, Michael spoke again. "You still there?" Daniel sighed. "Yeah, I'm here. I'm just trying to figure out why my brother suddenly wants to have a secret meeting like we're in some spy movie." Michael laughed, but it sounded forced. "Just come out here, all right? I'll explain when you get here." Then he said the one thing he had said 1,000 times in their lives. "All right, I'm on my way." If Daniel had known what that night would become, he might have asked more questions. But at the time, it just felt like another one of Michael's strange ideas. So Daniel grabbed his keys, kissed Emily on the forehead, and drove out of town. The road leading to the quarry was dark, almost completely empty. The headlights from Daniel's truck were the only light cutting through the forest that lined both sides of the narrow road. The rain made the pavement shine like glass. Daniel checked the dashboard clock. 9:18 p.m. Michael had called at 7, which meant his brother had already been waiting there for more than 2 hours. Mike better have a good reason for this, Daniel muttered to himself. A few minutes later, Daniel turned off the main road onto the gravel path that led toward the old quarry. The place had been abandoned for years. Most people in Ashford avoided it. Teenagers sometimes snuck out there for late-night parties, but during the week, the place was usually deserted. Daniel's truck rolled slowly down the muddy path. The tires crunched against loose gravel. Then, through the rain, Daniel saw headlights. A car parked near the edge of a quarry. Michael's truck. Daniel felt a small wave of relief. "Good," he said quietly. "At least he's still here." Daniel parked beside the truck and shut off his engine. The rain grew louder instantly without the sound of the motor. For a moment, Daniel just sat there, looking at Michael's truck. Something felt off. Michael's headlights were still on, but there was no movement, no silhouette in the driver's seat. Daniel grabbed his jacket and stepped out into the rain. "Mike?" he called. No answer. The rain soaked into his hair as he walked toward the truck. "Mike!" Still nothing. Daniel reached the driver's side door and tapped on the window. Empty. The seat was vacant. The keys were still in the ignition. Daniel's stomach tightened. "Mike?" he said again, louder this time. Only the sound of rain answered him. Daniel stepped back and scanned at the dark quarry. Then he noticed something. The passenger door of the truck was slightly open. Daniel walked around the vehicle and pushed the door wider. Inside, the interior light flickered on. The seat was empty, but something else caught Daniel's eye. Michael's phone. It was lying on the floor. Daniel picked it up slowly. The screen was cracked, and the last outgoing call was to him. Daniel felt a chill crawl up the back of his neck. "Mike?" he whispered. Then Daniel heard something, a sound that made his entire body freeze. It came from somewhere beyond the truck, down near the quarry's edge, a faint scraping sound, like shoes sliding across wet rock. Daniel's heart began pounding. "Mike, is that you?" The sound stopped. For several seconds, the forest was silent again. Daniel took a cautious step toward the edge of the quarry. The rain made the rocks slippery beneath his boots. "Mike, if this is some kind of joke..." Then he saw it, near the edge, a set of fresh footprints leading toward the steep drop that overlooked the quarry. Daniel followed them slowly, each step heavier than the last. And when he reached the edge, his breath caught in his throat, because at the bottom of the quarry, nearly 40 feet down, there was a shape lying in the rain, a body. Daniel stumbled backward. "No!" His voice shook. "No, no, no!" Daniel slid down the slope, nearly falling as he rushed toward the figure. The rain soaked through his clothes as he reached the bottom. "Mike!" The body didn't move. Daniel knelt beside him. Michael lay face down on the rocks, blood mixing with rainwater beneath him. Daniel turned him over. By the time the police arrived at the quarry that night, the rain had started to slow. Daniel Carter was sitting on the tailgate of his truck, soaked to the bone, staring blankly at the muddy ground beneath his boots. The flashing red and blue lights of two police cruisers painted the trees in strange colors. It felt surreal. Just 2 hours earlier, Daniel had been sitting at home with his wife Emily, complaining about how quiet the evening was. Now his younger brother was lying beneath a white tarp at the bottom of an abandoned quarry, and Daniel still couldn't understand how it had happened. A tall man in a brown sheriff's jacket approached him. "Daniel Carter?" Daniel looked up slowly. "Yeah." The man extended a hand. "Sheriff Harold Briggs, Ashford County." Daniel shook it weakly. Briggs's face was lined with age and experience, the kind of face that had seen too many bad nights like this. "I'm sorry about your brother," Briggs said quietly. Daniel nodded but said nothing. The sheriff glanced toward the quarry. "You said you found him at the bottom?" Daniel swallowed. "Yeah." "And he called you earlier tonight?" Daniel nodded again. "Asked me to meet him here." Briggs scribbled something in a small notebook. "Did he say why?" Daniel shook his head. "No, just said he needed to talk." The sheriff looked toward the truck parked near the edge. "That his vehicle?" "Yeah." Briggs walked toward it while two deputies carefully examined the muddy ground around the quarry. Daniel followed slowly. The passenger door of Michael's truck was still open. The interior light cast a pale glow over the wet seats. Sheriff Briggs leaned inside. Then he frowned. "That's strange," he muttered. Daniel felt a knot tighten in his chest. "What?" Briggs straightened up. "Your brother drove out here alone?" "As far as I know." The sheriff nodded slowly. "But the passenger seat's wet." Daniel blinked. "What?" Briggs pointed inside the truck. The seat cushion was soaked, darker than the rest of the interior, like someone had been sitting there in the rain. Daniel stared. "That doesn't make sense." Briggs nodded. "That's what I'm thinking." One of the deputies approached. "Sheriff?" Briggs turned. "What is it?" "We found something near the edge." They walked toward the quarry together. Daniel followed. The deputy pointed at the ground. Two distinct sets of footprints were visible in the mud. One set led toward the edge. The other stopped several feet away. Sheriff Briggs crouched down. "Looks like two people were here." Daniel felt a chill creep through his chest. "Two people?" The sheriff nodded. "Your brother wasn't alone tonight." Daniel looked toward the dark quarry. The rainwater pooled in small puddles between the rocks. "Did someone push him?" Briggs didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stood and studied the terrain. "Hard to say," he said eventually, "but if someone was here with him, we'll find out who." At least, that's what everyone believed that night, that the investigation would uncover the truth. But the truth never came. 3 days later, the official report arrived. Cause of death: accidental fall. The police believed Michael had slipped near the quarry's edge. The rain had made the rocks dangerous, and there was no evidence of foul play. Case closed. But something about that explanation bothered Daniel. The first time the doubt appeared was during the funeral. The entire town of Ashford had gathered at the small church on Maple Street. Michael's casket sat at the front of the room, surrounded by white lilies. Daniel sat beside Emily in the front pew. His mother cried quietly beside him. His father stared forward in silence. Daniel kept replaying the night over and over in his head. Michael's phone on the truck floor, the open passenger door, the second set of footprints, and one detail that bothered him more than anything else. Michael had asked him to come to the quarry, which meant Michael had planned to talk to him. But if Michael had slipped accidentally, why had he been standing near the edge at all? Daniel leaned toward Emily during the service. "Something about this isn't right," he whispered. Emily squeezed his hand gently. "Danny, I know this is hard." "No," Daniel said quietly. "I mean the accident." Emily looked at him. "What do you mean?" Daniel shook his head slowly. I don't think Mike fell." Emily frowned. "But the police said—" "I know what they said." Daniel's voice lowered. "But something about that night doesn't make sense." The funeral ended. The town moved on. Life in Ashford returned to normal, at least on the surface. But Daniel couldn't let it go. 2 weeks after the funeral, Daniel visited the sheriff's office. Sheriff Briggs sat behind his desk when Daniel walked in. "You still thinking about the quarry?" Briggs asked. Daniel nodded. "Yeah." Briggs leaned back in his chair. "Daniel, we looked at everything. The footprints? Rain washed most of them away. The passenger seat? Could have been anything." Daniel frowned. "But Mike called me out there. That means something." Briggs sighed. "I understand why this bothers you." Daniel leaned forward. "So you don't think anyone else was there?" Sheriff Briggs hesitated. "Look, sometimes when people die suddenly, our minds start looking for explanations." Daniel stared at him. "You think I'm imagining it?" "No," Briggs said calmly. "I think you're grieving." Daniel left the office that day feeling frustrated, but the mystery slowly faded as time passed. Daniel and Emily focused on building their life together. Years went by. Eventually, Daniel stopped asking questions.
The quarry became a painful memory. Michael's death became a quiet tragedy the town rarely talked about, and Daniel believed the mystery had ended. Until something strange happened 6 months after the funeral, something Daniel never told anyone about. It was late one evening. Daniel had been working in the garage when he noticed something odd. Michael's old toolbox was sitting on a shelf in the corner. Their father had given it to Michael years earlier. Daniel picked it up absent-mindedly. When he opened it, something unexpected fell out. A small, folded piece of paper. Daniel picked it up. At first, he thought it was just an old receipt, but when he unfolded it, his stomach dropped, because the note had been written in Michael's handwriting, and it contained only 6 words. 6 words Daniel would remember for the rest of his life. "If something happens to me, don't trust them." Daniel stared at the message for a long time. "Don't trust who?" he whispered. There was no explanation, no names, no context, just those 6 words. And for the next 15 years, Daniel would wonder what his brother meant, until the night his phone rang and the voice on the other end said, "Daniel, it's me." And suddenly, every unanswered question from that night at the quarry began to matter again. But the real secret behind Michael's death was far more complicated than Daniel could possibly imagine.
And it all started with something Michael had been involved in shortly before he died. Something dangerous, something no one in Ashford knew about.
The doorbell rang again. Daniel Carter stood in the middle of his living room, his hand still gripping the phone that had just delivered the most impossible call of his life. Outside, the porch light cast a pale yellow circle across the front steps. Whoever stood there was just beyond the glass, and according to the voice he had just heard, that person was supposed to be Michael. Daniel's chest rose slowly as he tried to study his breathing. This had to be a prank, some kind of sick joke. Maybe someone from town messing with him. Maybe someone who knew about Michael's death and thought it would be funny to scare him. But then the voice on the phone echoed again in his mind. Remember when Rusty buried my watch behind the oak tree? No one else knew that story. No one. Daniel swallowed and slowly set the phone on the table. The doorbell rang a third time, not impatient, not aggressive, just one quiet press of the button, almost cautious. Daniel walked toward the door. Each step felt heavier than the last. The house had never felt this silent before. Even the ticking wall clock seemed louder now. When Daniel reached the door, he hesitated. His hand hovered over the knob. Then he spoke. "Who's there?" For a moment, nothing happened. Then a voice answered from the other side. Low, calm, familiar. "Danny, it's me."
Daniel's knees nearly gave out. No one had called him Danny since childhood. Only one person ever used that nickname. Michael. Daniel slowly unlocked the door. The hinges creaked softly as it opened. The porch light illuminated a man standing at the edge of the steps. He was taller than Daniel remembered. Thinner. Older. But the face was unmistakable. Daniel felt the world tilt. "Mike?" The man nodded once. "It's me." Daniel stepped back like he had seen a ghost. Because, in a way, he had. The man standing on his porch was older, with streaks of gray in his dark hair and a tiredness in his eyes Daniel had never seen before. But it was still Michael, his brother. The same brother who had supposedly died at the quarry 15 years ago. Daniel shook his head slowly. "No." Michael sighed. "I knew this would be hard." Daniel laughed suddenly, but there was no humor in it. "Hard?" he said. "Mike, I buried you." Michael didn't answer. Rain began falling again, lightly topping against the porch roof. For a few seconds, neither man spoke. Finally, Daniel said quietly, "Get inside." The brothers sat across from each other at the kitchen table. Daniel hadn't taken his eyes off Michael once. It was like he was afraid that if he blinked, the man would disappear. Michael wrapped his hands around the coffee mug Daniel had given him. They were shaking slightly. "You look different," Daniel said finally. Michael smirked faintly. 15 years will do that." Daniel leaned back in his chair. "You want to explain something to me?" Michael nodded slowly. "Yeah." But instead of speaking immediately, he looked around the kitchen. "This place hasn't changed." Daniel didn't smile. "Mike."
Michael sighed. "Right." He leaned forward. "Before I tell you anything, I need you to answer one question." Daniel frowned. "What?" Michael's expression grew serious. "Did anyone ever ask about me after the funeral?" Daniel blinked. "What?" "Anyone strange? Anyone asking questions?" Daniel shook his head. "No." Michael nodded slowly, as if confirming something to himself. "That's good." Daniel slammed his hand on the table. "Mike!" Michael looked up.
You disappeared for 15 years, and the first thing you ask me is if someone came looking for you? Michael rubbed his face tiredly. Danny, I didn't disappear. Daniel stared. You died. Michael shook his head. No. The word hung in the air. Then Michael said something that made Daniel's stomach twist. I let everyone think I did. Daniel stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. You what? Michael remained calm. I had to. Daniel's voice rose. You had to fake your death? Michael nodded once. Yes. Daniel paced across the kitchen. You want to explain that sentence to me? Michael watched him quietly. Then he spoke. You remember that job I took in Columbus before the accident? Daniel stopped. You were doing construction. Michael shook his head. That's what I told everyone. Daniel frowned. What are you talking about? Michael leaned forward. I wasn't doing construction. Daniel stared. So what were you doing? Michael's eyes hardened slightly. I was working with a federal task force. Daniel blinked. What? Michael exhaled slowly. It started as a small job helping them investigate financial fraud. Daniel shook his head. Mike, you're telling me you were working for the government? Michael nodded. Sort of. Daniel rubbed his temples. This makes absolutely no sense. Michael continued. There was a man involved, a guy running a big operation moving money through small towns like ours. Daniel leaned against the counter. Money laundering? Michael nodded. Exactly. Daniel crossed his arms. So what does that have to do with you falling into a quarry? Michael looked down at the coffee mug in his hands. Everything. Daniel waited. Michael finally spoke again. That night, I wasn't alone at the quarry. Daniel's heart rate increased. The police thought there were 2 sets of footprints. Michael nodded. There were. Daniel's voice dropped. Who was the other person? Michael looked at him. The man I had been helping the task force investigate. Daniel's stomach turned. You met a criminal alone at night? Michael sighed. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Daniel shook his head. What happened? Michael leaned back. He found out I was working with the task force. Daniel felt a chill. And? Michael's voice was calm. He came to the quarry to make sure I never talked. Daniel stared at him. You mean he tried to kill you? Michael nodded. Yes. Daniel whispered. Then how are you alive? Michael paused, because the next part of the story was something Daniel had never imagined. I didn't fall into that quarry. Daniel froze. Michael continued quietly. Someone else did. The room went silent. Daniel slowly lowered himself back into the chair. Mike. Michael met his eyes. The man who tried to kill me. Daniel's voice barely came out. You're telling me the body they buried, Michael nodded slowly, was his. Daniel's chest tightened. Then why didn't you come home? Michael's expression darkened. Because if anyone knew I was alive, he looked toward the window. They would come after you. Daniel sat in stunned silence. For 15 years, he had believed his brother died in a tragic accident. But the truth was something else entirely. Michael had been hiding, running, protecting his family from a dangerous man. But something still didn't make sense. Daniel leaned forward slowly. Mike. Michael looked up. If that man died 15 years ago, Daniel swallowed. Why did you say on the phone that you don't have much time? Michael didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the front door. And when he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than before. Because the man I was running from, Daniel felt his chest tighten, wasn't working alone. Daniel's blood ran cold. What do you mean? Michael stood slowly. Danny, he looked toward the dark street outside the window. I think they finally found me. And right then, a car pulled slowly to a stop outside the house.
The car outside Daniel Carter's house didn't move. Its headlights stayed on, washing pale white light across the quiet street. Inside the kitchen, Daniel felt his chest tighten as he slowly turned toward the window. Michael was already standing beside it, watching. His body had gone completely still. Daniel spoke carefully. Do you know who that is? Michael didn't answer right away. He simply stared through the glass. Then he exhaled slowly. Maybe, he said. Daniel's stomach turned. Maybe? Michael stepped away from the window. I hoped they wouldn't find me again. Daniel frowned. You mean the people you were hiding from? Michael nodded once. For 15 years. Daniel rubbed his forehead. Mike, if someone's been after you for that long, why come back now? Michael looked at him. Because something changed. Daniel waited. Michael spoke quietly. The man who tried to kill me at the quarry, he was only part of the operation. Daniel crossed his arms. And the rest of them? Michael's expression darkened. They disappeared after the investigation collapsed. Daniel blinked. What investigation? Michael gave a tired smile. The one I was helping with. Daniel slowly sat down again. You mean the federal task force? Michael nodded. After the quarry incident, they shut everything down. Why? Michael hesitated. Because the people behind that money operation were bigger than anyone expected. Daniel's pulse quickened. How big? Michael leaned forward slightly. Big enough that the case quietly disappeared. Daniel stared at him. So you ran? Michael nodded. I had to. Daniel gestured toward the window. And now they've found you? Michael glanced outside again. The car was still there. Engine running. Then Michael shook his head. No. Daniel frowned. What do you mean? Michael's eyes softened slightly. I don't think that car belongs to them. Daniel blinked. Then who? Before Michael could answer, the car door outside opened. Daniel held his breath. A man stepped out. Not a criminal, not someone threatening, just a man in a dark jacket holding a folder. Michael looked through the glass for several seconds. Then something unexpected happened. Michael smiled. Daniel frowned. You know him? Michael nodded slowly. Yeah. Who is he? Michael turned towards the door. Someone who's been looking for me. Daniel stood up. For 15 years? Michael nodded. Come on. The brothers walked to the front door. Michael opened it. The man standing on the porch looked surprised. For a moment, none of them spoke. Then the man said quietly, Well, I'll be. Daniel looked between them. Mike, who is this? Michael turned slightly. Danny, this is Agent Robert Hale. The man extended a hand. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Daniel blinked. FBI? Agent Hale nodded. We've been trying to find your brother for a very long time. Michael stepped forward. And you finally did. Hale gave a small smile. Looks like it. Daniel looked confused. Hold on, if you were looking for him, why didn't you find him before now? Hale glanced at Michael. Because your brother was very good at staying hidden. Michael shrugged slightly. Had a lot of practice. Daniel frowned.
So what happens now? Agent Hale opened the folder he was carrying. Inside were several documents and photographs. The case your brother helped us build 15 years ago. Daniel leaned closer. Never actually died. Michael crossed his arms. You reopened it. Hale nodded. 2 years ago. Daniel felt the pieces slowly falling into place. You've been tracking those people again. Hale smiled faintly. And thanks to your brother, we finally have enough evidence. Michael raised an eyebrow. So it's done? Hale nodded. Tonight. Daniel blinked. What do you mean, tonight? Hale looked at him. Several arrests happened about an hour ago. Daniel turned to Michael. Wait, the people you were hiding from? Michael nodded slowly. They're finally going away. Agent Hale closed the folder. The entire network was dismantled tonight. Daniel felt the tension that had filled the house slowly begin to fade. For the first time since that impossible phone call, things made sense. The man Michael had been running from was gone. The organization behind him had been exposed, and the secret that had haunted their family for 15 years was finally over. Michael looked at Daniel. I told you I didn't have much time. Daniel shook his head slowly. You could have led with that. Michael laughed quietly. Agent Hale stepped back toward the porch steps. Well, gentlemen, my job here is finished. Daniel looked at him. You're just leaving? Hale nodded. You two have 15 years to catch up on. Then he paused. And Michael? Michael looked up. You did the right thing back then. Michael nodded. Thanks. Agent Hale walked back to his car. A moment later, the headlights disappeared down the quiet Ohio street. The house fell silent again, but this time the silence felt different, lighter. Michael stood in the doorway looking at the empty road. Daniel leaned against the frame beside him. You know, Daniel said slowly, I spent 15 years wondering why you called me out to that quarry. Michael smiled faintly. I was going to tell you everything that night. Daniel looked at him. Why didn't you? Michael sighed. Because things got complicated. Daniel laughed softly. That's one way to describe it. For a moment, neither brother spoke. Then Daniel said something quietly. You missed a lot. Michael nodded. I know. Daniel looked down the road. But you're here now. Michael placed a hand on his shoulder. Yeah. Inside the house, the old wall clock ticked quietly, the same clock that had been counting seconds when the phone rang earlier that night. But now those seconds felt different. The mystery had been solved. Justice had finally come, and the brother Daniel believed he had buried 15 years ago was standing beside him. Sometimes the truth takes years to reveal itself. Sometimes justice moves slowly, but when it finally arrives, it can bring something just as powerful as answers. It can bring peace. Before we end tonight's story, I'd like to ask you something. What do you think you would have done if you were in Daniel's position? If someone you loved, someone you believed had died years ago, suddenly appeared at your door, would you feel relief, confusion, or something else entirely? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if this story kept you guessing until the end, consider liking the video and subscribing so you don't miss the next one. Because if you thought this story was surprising, wait until you hear what happened in the next case. And trust me, that one is even harder to believe.